The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 36 years to the day after I walked out of Superior National Forest with Dalton bleeding in my arms and a story we swore we'd never tell. The envelope was thin, almost weightless, but my hand shook as I held it. No return address. Just 3 words, written in handwriting I recognized instantly, though I hadn't seen it in decades. Never speak it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The message was brief, written in the same shaky script that told me whoever sent this was old now, maybe dying. They're asking questions again. New disappearances. Same patterns. The silence won't hold much longer. Do what you think is right. Lunacy 24. Lunacy 24. Jesus Christ. I hadn't heard that designation since the last briefing. The one where they told us what we could and couldn't say, what we'd lose if we talked. The one where Dalton sat with his right sleeve pinned up, empty, and didn't say a goddamn word. I should have burned the letter. That's what we were supposed to do with anything that might lead back to that winter. But I couldn't because 2 weeks earlier, my niece Emma had sat across from me at dinner, her eyes bright with excitement, and told me she'd been accepted into the Forest Service training program. She wanted to be a park ranger. She wanted to work in the Northern Territories. She wanted to walk into the same woods that took Dalton's arm and 3 other rangers' lives. I'd smiled, congratulated her, told her I was proud. I'd lied through my teeth while my coffee went cold in my hands. For 36 years, I've kept my mouth shut. I've watched the documentaries with their neat explanations about bear attacks and harsh winters. I've read the official reports that blamed inadequate training and equipment failure. I've attended the memorials where we stood in dress uniforms and pretended we didn't know exactly what happened to our friends. The government paid well for our silence. They relocated us, gave us desk jobs, made sure we understood that some truths are too dangerous for public consumption. And maybe they were right. Maybe the panic that would follow the truth would be worse than the lie. But Emma is 20 years old, and she's going into those woods, and I can't let her go in blind. Dalton lost his arm because we went in blind. Because the old rangers who knew wouldn't talk. Because there are things the Forest Service doesn't put in training manuals, things they've buried under layers of bureaucracy and classification stamps. Things they've decided the public can't handle. They call it the Wendigo. Even now, writing those words makes my chest tight. We were told never to speak it, never to write it, never to acknowledge it existed. But Emma deserves to know why some ranger stations sit empty every winter. Why certain trails get closed without explanation. Why there are protocols in the manual that don't make sense unless you know what they're really for. So, I'm going to break my silence. I'm going to tell you what happened in Superior National Forest in the winter of 1987, and why every ranger who survived made a choice to lie for the rest of their lives. But to understand why we kept quiet, you need to understand what we faced. You need to go back to the beginning, to when I was 23 years old and stupid enough to think I knew what kind of dangers lived in those woods. The Superior National Forest stretched out before me like an ocean of green and gold, 3.1 million acres of wilderness that made my forestry degree feel like a child's toy compass. The ranger station sat at the edge of it all, a cluster of weathered buildings that had survived 40 winters of punishing cold and isolation. The main cabin was all timber and stone, built in the 30s by the Civilian Conservation Corps with the kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. Behind it stood the equipment shed, a smaller bunkhouse, and the radio tower that connected us to the outside world when the weather allowed. I pulled up in my Ford Ranger on a June morning so perfect it seemed staged. 23 years old, fresh diploma, and a job most guys would kill for. Dalton was waiting on the porch, older by 8 years and wiser by a lifetime. He'd been the one to call when the position opened up, told me to send my application before anyone else heard about it. Having your brother as your supervisor might bother some people, but not me. Dalton had always looked out for me. The crew assembled for introductions like characters from a Jack London novel. Leonard, the station chief, had the weathered face of a man in his mid-50s who'd spent every one of those years outdoors. He shook my hand with a grip that could crush bone, but chose not to. Vernon was the oldest at 64, a quiet man who seemed to occupy space differently than the others, like he was always listening to something just beyond normal hearing range. Simone had worked these woods for 20 years and moved through them with the confidence of someone who knew every trail, every ridge, every dangerous crossing. Joel was 28, friendly in that effortless way some people have, already cracking jokes about my clean uniform and unscuffed boots. The first 2 weeks passed like a dream I didn't want to wake from. We cleared trails, monitored watersheds, tracked wildlife populations. I learned to read the forest the way Vernon did, noticing the small things that told larger stories. A broken branch here, scat there, the way birds went quiet in certain valleys. The work was hard, physical, the kind of tired that felt earned. At night, we'd gather in the main cabin, play cards, swap stories. This was what I'd imagined when I chose this path. Purpose. Brotherhood. A place where I belonged. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't quite fit. The way conversations would stop when I entered a room, then restart on a different topic entirely. How Vernon would sometimes stand at the window staring into the darkening trees, his jaw working like he was chewing words he refused to speak. The locked file cabinet in Leonard's office that no one ever mentioned. The odd phrasing in certain protocols, instructions that seemed to reference situations that made no logical sense. I told myself I was imagining things, that every workplace had its quirks and rhythms, that I was the new guy and naturally outside certain circles. Give it time, I thought. Prove yourself, and the rest will follow. I had no idea that some circles existed specifically to keep people like me outside, at least until winter came and made that luxury impossible. Joel and I found the deer on a routine patrol along Ridge Trail 7, its body sprawled across a granite outcropping like something had dropped it from a great height. I'd seen predator kills before during training, the efficient work of mountain lions or the messy enthusiasm of coyotes. This was neither. The rib cage had been opened with surgical precision, organs removed in a pattern that made no sense. No scavenger feeding, no drag marks, no blood trail leading to or from the site. The muscle tissue along the haunches showed tearing that looked almost methodical, like something had been selecting specific parts while ignoring others entirely. Huh, Joel said, his usual easy manner evaporating. That's weird. Should we document it, take photos for the wildlife log? Nah. He was already backing away, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Probably just got hit by a car, wandered up here. Nature does strange things when animals are in shock. The nearest road was 4 miles away, across terrain that would be impossible for an injured deer to navigate. I started to point this out, but Joel was already moving down the trail, walking faster than necessary. That evening at dinner, I mentioned it. Just a casual observation, the kind of thing we shared every night over Dalton's perpetually overcooked chili. Found the strangest deer carcass today. The feeding pattern was really unusual, almost like... Vernon's fork froze halfway to his mouth. The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on. Bears do weird things sometimes, Dalton said finally, his expression carefully neutral, especially this time of year. It didn't look like bear predation. The tearing was to, how about that storm system moving in? Simone cut in smoothly, her voice just a shade too bright. We should probably check the eastern shelters before it hits. The conversation shifted like water flowing around a stone, and I was left holding my observation in the sudden quiet, feeling foolish without knowing why. Over the next few days, I started noticing the pattern. Certain topics created that same weighted silence. The northeastern quadrants of the park, missing persons reports, anything about the winter of 1979. Questions would be deflected, redirected, or simply ignored until the asker gave up. Even Joel, normally happy to chat about anything, would suddenly remember urgent tasks when these subjects arose. I found the filing cabinet on a Wednesday, alone in the station while the others cleared storm debris. It was labeled Wildlife Incidents 1970s to 1985, tucked in the storage room behind boxes of emergency flares. Most of the reports were routine: injured hikers, aggressive elk, one memorable incident involving a bear and someone's poorly secured cooler. But there were gaps. Whole months missing. Pages that had been carefully removed, leaving only the torn edges behind in the binding. One partial report remained from August 1976. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. 3 separate witnesses report hearing crying man near Esther Lake Trail Junction. Upon investigation, no human presence found. Tracks discovered consistent with the rest of the page was gone. Looking for something? I spun around. Simone stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Just familiarizing myself with past incidents. Thought it might help me understand the area better. Some things are better left to people with more experience. She said it kindly, but there was steel underneath. We all have our roles here, Rhett. Yours is to learn what we teach you, not to go digging through old files. She left without waiting for a response, and I carefully closed the cabinet, my hands trembling slightly. I should have listened to her. Should have recognized that warning for what it was, a kindness I didn't deserve. But I was 23 and arrogant enough to believe that secrets existed to be uncovered, that truth was always worth pursuing, that my curiosity mattered more than their carefully maintained silence. I had no idea that some knowledge carries a price, and that price gets paid in ways you can't imagine until it's far too late to give it back. The campers arrived at the station just after dawn, a family of 4 who'd cut their trip short by 3 days. The father did most of the talking while his wife kept glancing back toward the trailhead, as if something might follow them out of the woods. It started around 3 in the morning, he said. This crying sound, like a man in absolute agony, just wailing. We thought someone was hurt, so I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. How far away did it sound? I asked, pulling out an incident form. That's the thing. At first, maybe a quarter-mile north, but while I was getting my boots on, it moved. Suddenly, it was coming from the east, near the lake, then south, then... He shook his head. It was everywhere, and nowhere, moving faster than anything could move. His teenage daughter spoke up, her voice small. It wasn't human. I know what you're going to say, but it wasn't. I gave them my most reassuring smile. Actually, you'd be surprised how many animals sound human when they vocalize. Common loons have this distinctive wail that can really carry across water. Or it could have been a lynx. They make this incredible crying sound during mating season that's been mistaken for human distress for centuries. The father looked unconvinced, but relieved to have any explanation. Maybe. It just felt wrong, you know, the way it moved. Sound does strange things in the mountains, I continued. The topology can create echoes, make it seem like something's moving when it's actually stationary. The wind carries it in different directions, plays tricks on your perception. That's enough. Dalton's voice cut across the room like a blade. I turned, surprised. He was staring at me with an intensity I'd never seen before, his jaw tight. "Why don't you folks head home and get some rest?" he said to the family, his tone softening. "We'll file the report. You did the right thing coming in." After they left, Dalton jerked his head toward the door. "Outside. Now." I followed him behind the maintenance shed, confusion turning to unease. He rounded on me the moment we were out of sight. "You don't say that word," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Ever. Do you understand me?" "What word?" I asked, genuinely lost. "Don't play dumb with me, Rhett." "I'm not. I don't know what you're talking about. I was just explaining about loons and lynx, not those words." He was breathing hard, his hands clenched at his sides. I ran back through what I'd said, searching. "The Wendigo?" I was about to mention it's a common legend that explains these kinds of reports. Indigenous folklore about... The change in Dalton was instantaneous and terrible. All the color drained from his face like someone had opened a valve. His eyes went wide, and he took an actual step backward. Jesus Christ. The curse shocked me more than anything. In 15 years of knowing him, I'd never heard Dalton take the Lord's name in vain. Jesus Christ, Rhett. "What? It's just a story. I wasn't going to tell them that, I was just..." But he was already walking away, moving fast, his shoulders rigid. He looked back once, and the fear in his face was so raw, so unmistakable, that my breath caught in my throat. That night, I lay awake in my cabin, replaying the moment over and over. The way Dalton had reacted to that single word, not with anger or frustration, but with pure, visceral terror. This man who'd faced down charging elk and aggressive bears without flinching. This man who was practically family. What could possibly frighten him that badly? I had to know. The call came in at 11:43 on Labor Day Sunday, right as the weekend crowd was packing up to head home. Curtis Brennan, a fisherman from Duluth who'd been coming up here for 20 years, got on the emergency channel with a voice I barely recognized. High and thin, stretched tight with panic. "There's a body, Jesus Christ, there's a body at Disappointment Lake. You need to get out here, you need to..." Static swallowed the rest. Leonard grabbed the radio. "Curtis, this is Station Chief Morrison. Confirm your location and status." "The North Shore, the Rocky Point. I was just checking my lines and Oh God, the smell. I was already pulling on my pack when Leonard turned to Dalton. "Take Rhett. Get out there and secure the scene. I'll call the county." The 2-hour canoe journey to Disappointment Lake was the longest of my life. Dalton paddled with mechanical precision, his face set like stone. Every time I tried to speak, he just shook his head. The wilderness around us felt different now, watching. The trees leaned in too close. The water was too still. Curtis was sitting on the shore when we arrived, 20 feet from his boat, arms wrapped around his knees. He was in his 60s, weathered and solid, the kind of man who'd probably dressed his share of deer. But his hands were shaking so badly he could barely point toward the outcropping. "I didn't touch anything," he said. "I didn't go near it after I saw. I just radioed and waited." We found him on the rocks, male, early 30s maybe, though decomposition made it hard to be certain. He'd been there at least a week, probably longer. The wildlife had been at him, but that wasn't what made my stomach turn. It was the wounds. His torso was opened up, ribs visible through ragged tears in the flesh. His left leg was nearly separated at the thigh, the tissue torn rather than cut. The wounds weren't clean. They weren't the work of any tool I recognized. The edges were irregular, shredded. His hands showed defensive wounds, deep gouges across the palms and forearms. Drag marks scored the rock behind him, streaked with old blood. Then Dalton found the deer, 3 of them, scattered in the brush 30 yards from the body. Probably from late summer. The carcasses showed the same pattern. Massive trauma, ragged wounds, tissue torn away in chunks. One had been partially consumed, but not the way bears feed. Not the way anything I knew of feeds. Dalton spent an hour documenting everything with the camera, his movements precise and controlled, but I saw how he kept his distance from the wounds, how his jaw clenched tighter with each photograph. When he finally reached for the radio, his voice was carefully neutral. "Station Chief, this is Dalton. We have confirmation of human remains. Male victim, significant trauma. I'm calling a code yellow." The pause on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. "Copy that," Leonard said, and all the warmth was gone from his voice. "Secure the scene. County's sending investigators at first light. You'll need to maintain position overnight." We set up camp on the small island 50 yards offshore. Close enough to keep the scene secure. Far enough that we didn't have to smell it. Dalton worked in silence, his movements efficient and automatic. When I tried to talk about what we'd seen, about the wounds, about the deer, he cut me off. "Not now, Rhett. But those injuries, they don't make sense. What could—" I said not now. He turned his back to me and stared out at the darkening water, his shoulders rigid. The sun dropped below the tree line, and the temperature fell with it. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called out, lonely and lost. Then, just after midnight, we heard the crying. I took first watch because sleep wasn't coming anyway. The body was out there in the dark, 50 yards across black water, and every time I closed my eyes I saw those wounds, the way the flesh had been torn, the defensive cuts on his palms where he'd tried to protect himself from something. The island was small enough that I could pace its perimeter in 2 minutes. I did it 17 times before Dalton emerged from his tent at 11, already dressed, rifle in hand. "Get some rest," he said. "I've got it." I crawled into my sleeping bag fully clothed, but sleep was impossible. The temperature had dropped below freezing. My breath fogged in the tent's close darkness. Outside, I heard Dalton moving, the soft crunch of his boots on frozen ground. Then the footsteps stopped. I don't know what made me crawl out of the tent. Some instinct, some animal sense that something had changed. Dalton sat on a flat rock facing the water, completely motionless. The rifle lay across his lap. His hands gripped it so tight his knuckles showed white even in the moonlight. "Dalton?" He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me at all. His eyes were fixed on the north shore, and when I followed his gaze I heard it. A man crying, deep, wrenching sobs that carried clear across the water. The sound of someone in absolute despair. Someone hurt. Someone dying. I started to reach for my flashlight. "Don't!" Dalton's voice came out in a whisper so tight it barely qualified as sound. "Don't shine the light. Don't call out. Don't move. Someone's hurt. We have to—" "That's not someone." His jaw clenched. "Be quiet." The crying continued. Ragged breaths between sobs. Wordless agony that made my chest ache with the need to help. I'd been trained to respond to distress calls. Every instinct screamed at me to do something. But Dalton's fear held me frozen. I'd seen him face down aggressive bears. I'd watched him climb ice faces that would kill most people. I'd never seen him afraid. The crying went on for 15 minutes. Then it stopped mid-sob, cut off like someone had flipped a switch. 3 seconds of silence. Then it started again from the west. The same voice, the same desperate sobs. But now the sound came from a completely different direction, at least 300 yards from where it had been. No one could move that fast. Not through dense forest in complete darkness. The wind died. Everything went quiet. No waves lapping at shore. No trees rustling. No night birds. Just dead, suffocating silence that pressed against my eardrums like physical weight. Dalton didn't blink, didn't move. I watched a tremor run through his shoulders, his whole body locked in some kind of paralyzed terror I couldn't understand. His eyes stayed fixed on the tree line across the water. An hour passed, maybe more. My legs cramped, my hands went numb. But I didn't dare move because Dalton hadn't moved, and whatever had scared him this badly was still out there in the dark. False dawn came around 5:30, that pale gray light that promises morning without delivering it. Dalton finally blinked. His shoulders sagged. He drew in a long, shaking breath. "Pack up," he said. "We're leaving." We broke camp in silence. My hands shook so badly I could barely collapse the tent poles. Dalton moved with mechanical efficiency, his face empty of everything except exhaustion. The county investigators arrived as we reached the dock. 2 detectives and a forensics team. Leonard was with them, his expression grim. He pulled Dalton aside while the others headed for the island. I was loading gear into the truck when I heard Leonard's voice, low and urgent. Was it like the winter of '79? Dalton's response was too quiet to make out, but the look on his face made something cold settle in my stomach. The forensics team worked the island for 3 days. I watched from the dock through binoculars, counting body bags. Just 2. Sarah and Michael. The third hiker was never found. I was coiling rope when I heard the medical examiner talking to one of the detectives. Her voice carried across the water in the still morning air. "Same pattern as '79, she said. "Tissue trauma consistent with predation, but the bite radius doesn't match any known species in the region." "What are you putting on the report?" "What I have to. Animal attack, species undetermined." Leonard instituted new protocols the day after the island cleared. He called us into the station at dawn, his face carved from granite. No more solo patrols. Rifles required on all backcountry assignments, expanded trail closures throughout the northern sector, and absolute radio silence on speculation about what happened. "We follow procedure," Leonard said. "We keep people safe. We don't create panic with stories we can't verify." Vernon sat in the back corner, his weathered hands folded on the table. As we filed out, I heard him mutter to Joel, "Third time's the pattern." I started spending my off hours in the records room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while I pulled file after file, searching for patterns. The winter of '79 yielded almost nothing. 2 pages about a wildlife incident and a recommendation for increased patrols. But the pages were numbered 1 through 4. Pages 2 and 3 were missing, cleanly removed from the binder. I found similar gaps in records from 1963, 1947, 1931. Always the same notation after the incident. Protocols resumed per VK recommendation. The 1976 file was thicker. Someone named Vernon Cale had written a detailed memo about revival of old protocols in response to increased activity. The next page referenced indigenous consultation and traditional warning systems. Then nothing. The rest of the section was gone. I cornered Vernon outside the equipment shed on a gray Thursday afternoon. He was oiling a chainsaw, his movements slow and methodical. "Who's VK?" I asked, his hands stilled. "That's not a question you want answered." "The hell it isn't. People are dying and everyone's pretending. You think you're the first ranger to notice patterns?" Vernon set down the oil can. "You think you're the first to demand answers? This land's older than Minnesota, older than America. Some things that live here don't care about our maps and protocols. Then tell me what we're dealing with. We're dealing with keeping people alive. That's the only thing that matters." Over the next week, 3 more incidents. A food cache at Thunder Ridge destroyed, the metal container torn open like aluminum foil. A family's golden retriever found half-eaten behind their cabin, the remaining tissue showing those same impossible bite patterns. Boot prints in the mud that started human and ended as something else. The pattern was expanding southward, toward the populated areas, toward the towns. Leonard called a full staff meeting on Monday morning. Everyone crammed into the conference room. Rangers, maintenance crew, administrative staff, the air thick with tension and unasked questions. I sat through 15 minutes of Leonard discussing increased patrols and visitor safety protocols. Then I couldn't hold it anymore. Why are we pretending? My voice cut through the room. Why are we acting like this is just some aggressive bear when we all know it's not? Silence. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. People are dead. More will die. And we're sitting here talking about trail closures like that's going to stop it. I stood up, my chair scraping loud against the floor. The Ojibwe have a name for it. The old rangers knew, you all know. It's a Wendigo. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Vernon stood slowly, his chair creaking. He looked at me with something that might have been pity, might have been anger. Then he walked out without a word. Joel stared at his hands. Simone's face hardened into a mask I couldn't read. Dalton sat frozen in the back row, his knuckles white against the table edge. Leonard closed his eyes like I'd physically struck him. Meeting adjourned, he said quietly. Everyone filed out in silence. Leonard waited until the room emptied except for me. My office, he said. There are things you need to know about Dalton, about what happened to him that winter. Leonard's office smelled like old coffee and manila folders. He sat behind his desk, hands folded, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Dalton was hospitalized in January 1980, he said without preamble. 3 weeks at County General. Couldn't speak for the first 5 days, just stared at the wall. The doctors thought he'd had a complete psychotic break. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They kept him under observation. Mandated counseling for 6 months after discharge. He had to pass a psychological evaluation before I could bring him back on staff. Leonard's jaw tightened. I didn't want to bring him back. But he begged me, said he needed to be here, that someone had to remember. Remember what? That's his story to tell. Leonard stood, if he chooses to tell it, which he hasn't. Not to anyone. Not even to me, not really. Just the bare facts required for the incident reports. What incident reports? But Leonard was already opening his door, gesturing me out. I found Dalton by the equipment shed, checking inventory on a clipboard like it was just another Tuesday. Like he hadn't walked out of that meeting looking like he'd seen a ghost. Why didn't you tell me? My voice came out harder than I intended. 3 weeks in the hospital, Dalton. You couldn't speak for 5 days. His pen stopped moving. He didn't look up. Leonard had no right. I had a right to know. I'm your brother. I've been working here for 3 years and you never said a goddamn word. The clipboard clattered against the concrete. What did you want me to say? His voice cracked. That I spent winter 1979 watching people die? That 3 rangers went into those woods and never came back whole? 3 people died? 3 confirmed. God knows how many hikers, how many hunters we never found. Dalton's hands were shaking. And then we stopped talking about it. Instituted the silence protocol, and the deaths stopped. That's not Charlie Morrison. The name came out like broken glass. Veteran ranger, 20 years experience. Found him scattered across a 1/4 mile of forest. Had to collect him in garbage bags. I couldn't breathe. I heard him die, Rhett. Over the radio, 40 minutes away, and I heard every second of it. His screaming, the wet sounds, him begging for help that couldn't come fast enough. Dalton's voice dropped to a whisper. I hear those screams, every time I close my eyes. Every single night for 14 years. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes were raw. I believe in legends because I've seen what happens when you don't respect them, when you think you're smarter than the old stories, when you think science and logic can explain things that were old when these mountains were young. His voice broke completely, and I'll be damned if I watch my little brother make the same mistakes I did. He walked away, shoulders hunched like he was carrying something too heavy to bear alone. I stood there in the cold morning air, part of me wanting to run after him, to apologize, to say I understood, but another part, the rational part, the educated part, the part that believed in evidence and reason, still insisted there had to be an explanation. A real explanation. That second part won. I should have listened, should have heard the truth in my brother's broken voice, in Leonard's warning, in the weight of silence that had kept people alive for 14 years. But I was too arrogant, too certain, too convinced that I knew better than the legends, better than the old stories, better than the people who'd survived by respecting what they couldn't understand. That's when everything fell apart. The week passed like a held breath slowly released. No incidents, no strange calls, no reports of unusual animal behavior. The forest returned to its September rhythm, tourists taking last-minute trips before the cold set in, hikers enjoying the turning leaves, families camping under clear skies. On September 27th, Leonard called a meeting to discuss lifting the closures. "Can't keep them shut down forever," he said, spreading maps across the conference table. "Budgets stretch thin, and we're getting complaints from every direction." Vernon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Or maybe it's close enough it doesn't need to hunt, obviously. The room went quiet. Leonard sighed and rolled up the maps. "We'll give it another week." I felt vindicated. A week without incidents proved my point. Whatever had happened was explainable, manageable, over. Dalton avoided my eyes during the meeting, but I caught him watching me afterward with an expression I couldn't read. Disappointment, maybe. Or pity. I told myself I was right, that the rational explanation always wins. That lasted until 4:30 p.m. on September 28th. The radio crackled with a distress call that made my stomach drop. Young couple, Hog Creek area, one of the closed sections. The woman's voice came through broken and terrified. She fell running from something, twisted her ankle bad. "We can't move fast and it came into our camp and we need help now." "What came into your camp?" Vernon's voice was controlled, professional. "I don't know. We can't see it, but we can hear it. It's crying. It sounds like a child crying, but it's not a child. Please, it's still here." Dalton and I were the closest responders, 90 minutes out if we pushed hard. The sun would set at 6:45. Vernon met us at the truck carrying the Remington. "Take this." Dalton checked the chamber without a word, and we started hiking. It was brutal. We moved at a pace that had my lungs burning within 20 minutes, scrambling over deadfall, pushing through underbrush, not talking because we needed every breath for speed. The forest darkened around us as clouds moved in, stealing precious light. 30 minutes in, the smell hit us. Rot mixed with something sweet and chemical, spoiled coffee, overripe kiwi, something fundamentally wrong. Dalton stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into him. He unslung the rifle, checked the chamber again, even though we both knew it was loaded. "Stay close," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands were steady on the weapon. 20 minutes later we heard the crying. It came from the west, maybe 200 yards off the trail. High-pitched and wavering, the sound of a child in desperate distress. Every instinct screamed to go toward it, to help, to investigate. Dalton grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. Don't look at it. Don't call out to it. Don't shine your light toward it. Keep walking. But keep walking. We moved forward. The crying followed. It maintained perfect distance, always 200 yards out, always just loud enough to hear. Sometimes it sounded closer. Sometimes it seemed to come from a different direction. But it never stopped, and it never let us forget it was there. The light was failing fast. My hand found my flashlight, but Dalton's warning kept it clipped to my belt. I couldn't help it. I glanced left into the darkening trees. Something pale and hunched crouched between two birches. Too tall to be crouching like that. Arms too long. Head cocked at an angle that made my vision swim. Dalton's hand clamped on my shoulder like a vice. Move now. We reached the camp at 6:30 p.m. with maybe 15 minutes of usable light left. The tent was slashed to ribbons. Food scattered everywhere, packages torn open, and contents strewn across the ground. A sleeping bag lay shredded, synthetic fill drifting in the evening breeze like snow. Brendan stood in the center of the destruction, early 20s, holding a hatchet in white-knuckled hands. Casey sat against a tree, her ankle swollen purple, tears streaming down her face. Both of them looked at us with the hollow eyes of people who'd seen something that broke their understanding of the world. The crying had stopped. We had to get them out before full dark, back down that trail with whatever was out there following us. And that's when we finally saw it clearly. Dalton worked fast, stripping branches with his knife to fashion a splint for Casey's ankle. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping torn strips of tent fabric around the makeshift support. The crying had stopped 5 minutes ago. That silence felt worse than the sound ever had. "We move in formation," Dalton said, testing the splint. "I take point. Rhett, you help Casey. Brendan, you carry both packs. Stay close, stay quiet, and if I say run, you don't ask questions." We moved out at 6:47 p.m. Full dark would hit in 30 minutes, maybe less. The trail descended through thick pine, our flashlights cutting narrow tunnels through the blackness, pressing in from all sides. Casey bit back whimpers with each step despite the splint. Brendan's breathing came fast and shallow behind me. 20 minutes in, we'd covered maybe half a mile. Then the crying started again. Ahead of us, on the trail. Dalton's hand went up. We stopped. The sound continued, that same desperate child's wail, but now it blocked our path forward. Dalton gestured left, into the trees. We moved off trail, stepping carefully over roots and rocks. 20 feet in, he signaled us to stop and crouch. We waited. Watched the trail through the gaps in the pines. It moved into Dalton's flashlight beam. The thing stood 7 feet tall but hunched, spine curved forward like it had been broken and healed wrong. Gray-white skin stretched tight over bones, every rib visible, every joint swollen to twice normal size. Its legs bent backward at the knee, giving it a stance that looked ready to drop to all fours at any moment. The skin hung loose around its neck and chest, creating folds that resonated with each crying sound it made. Tears ran down its face. Real tears, cutting tracks through the dirt on its cheeks. Its mouth hung slack, chest heaving with each wail, but its eyes caught the light and reflected it back yellow-green. The teeth were too large for the mouth, creating an expression that mixed anguish with something else. Hunger. Bottomless, consuming hunger. Casey made a small sound in her throat. Just a tiny whimper. The creature's head snapped toward us. The crying stopped. Its neck turned at an angle that should have been impossible, body still facing the trail, head locked on our position. Dalton stepped out from the trees, rifle raised. "Back off!" The thing tilted its head, studying him. Dalton fired into the air. The creature didn't even flinch. Instead, it made a new sound, a high whining that came from somewhere deep in its chest. Hungry. Pleading. Dalton fired at the ground near its feet. The creature moved. It dropped to all fours and charged, covering the distance impossibly fast, legs pumping in that backward bent gait. Dalton fired center mass. The impact was visible, jerking the creature's torso back. It staggered but kept coming. Another shot, another hit, still it came. Then movement from the left. A second shape faster than thought. It hit Dalton from the side, taking him down hard. They rolled. The creature came up on top, and it had Dalton's left arm in its mouth, shaking its head like a dog with a toy. Blood sprayed black in the flashlight beam. I was moving before I could think, swinging my rifle like a club. The stock cracked against the creature's skull with a sound like breaking pottery. It turned on me, releasing Dalton's arm. Face to face now, 3 feet away, and I could see into those eyes. There was nothing human left in them. Just hunger that went down forever. Dalton's arm hung at the wrong angle, but his right hand shot up and grabbed the creature from behind, fingers digging into the loose skin at its neck. The thing twisted with movements no spine should allow, claws raking at Dalton's chest. They rolled across the ground, the creature's joints bending in directions that made my vision swim. "Run!" Dalton screamed through gritted teeth. "Get them out! Run!" Brendan was pulling Casey backward. I stood frozen. The creature's movements were impossibly fast, impossibly flexible, always a second ahead of where Dalton tried to pin it. "Rhett, go!" I ran, grabbed Brendan's pack, got my shoulder under Casey's other arm, half carried her into the darkness. Behind us, Dalton screamed again, a different sound this time, and then it cut off abruptly. I didn't look back, I didn't go back, I just ran and left my brother behind. We crashed through the forest toward the trail, half carrying Casey between us. She'd gone quiet, the shock settling in deep. Brendan kept asking questions I couldn't answer. "What was that thing? Where's Dalton? Are we coming back for him?" I didn't have words, just kept moving, branches tearing at my face, Casey's weight heavy against my shoulder. The canoe launch materialized out of the darkness just after midnight. I lowered Casey onto the dock, hands shaking so badly I could barely work the radio. "Station, this is Maccabi. Officer down, single attacker. Need immediate support. Medical evac. Send everyone." My voice sounded flat in my own ears. Strange. Like someone else was speaking. Leonard's response crackled back immediately. "Red, what's your location?" A pause. "Who's down?" "Dalton. We were attacked. He told me to get civilians out. He's still out there." "What attacked you?" I opened my mouth, closed it. The words wouldn't come. "How do you explain what we'd seen?" "I don't know. It looked like a person, but it wasn't." Silence on the other end. Then Leonard's voice, harder than I'd ever heard it. "Do not go back in. Do you understand me? You stay at that launch." The first responder arrived 40 minutes later. By then, I'd wrapped Casey in an emergency blanket and she'd started crying, deep shuddering sobs that wouldn't stop. The search team assembled quickly. 8 people, heavily armed, faces grim in the flashlight beams. I tried to join them, but Leonard put a hand on my chest. "You're staying here. That's my brother. That's an order." They found Dalton 3 hours later, half a mile from the attack site. He'd crawled part of the way, walked part of it. His left arm hung by tissue and skin, everything else torn away. The amount of blood he'd lost should have killed him. He was conscious when they reached him, hypothermic, going into shock, but conscious. The helicopter lifted off at dawn. Leonard drove me to Duluth in silence. 3 hours that felt like 3 years. Surgery took 7 hours. They couldn't save the arm. Amputated below the elbow. I wasn't allowed to see him the first week, family only. My parents arrived on day 2. My mother looked at me in the hospital hallway like I'd done it myself. Like I'd been the one with claws. When they finally let me in, Dalton was awake. The stump was bandaged, stark white against the hospital sheets. His face had gone gray, 10 years older than it had been a week ago. "Hey." He turned his head, didn't speak. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." His eyes found mine. When he spoke, his voice was flat, empty. "You should have listened. You should have listened." That was all. He turned away and wouldn't look at me again. The official report came out 3 days later. Animal attack. Species undetermined. Dalton's statement was brief. Dark, unidentifiable, he'd fought it off. The medical examiner noted wounds inconsistent with known predators but offered no alternative explanation. Brendan and Casey both insisted they'd seen an emaciated man. The official conclusion, misidentified bear in poor lighting conditions. No search was conducted for the attacker. The closure expanded. Another 20 square miles added to the restricted zones. No explanation given to the public. Vernon put in his retirement papers the following month. Joel requested a transfer to a station downstate. Leonard started looking older, the lines around his eyes deepening every time I saw him, and I started falling apart. Vernon retired a month early, just walked in one morning, handed Leonard his badge and keys, and left. No ceremony, no goodbye drinks, no final shift. His truck disappeared down the access road and that was it. 32 years of service ended with a handshake and silence. Joel put in for a transfer in November. Got assigned to a station downstate near the Iowa border. Flat country, open land, nothing bigger than coyotes. He quit the Forest Service entirely within a year. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in Des Moines. Leonard stayed, but he looked different. The lines around his eyes had deepened into crevasses. His hair went from salt and pepper to pure white over that winter. He moved slower, spoke less. The weight of what he knew, what he'd always known, seemed to settle into his bones. I tried to keep working. Went back on patrol in early November. Told myself I could handle it, that I just needed to push through. 3 days in, I found a deer carcass near the eastern boundary. Just a deer. Normal predation, probably wolves. But my hands started shaking. My vision tunneled. I couldn't breathe. I sat in my truck for 2 hours, unable to move. Unable to think about anything except the sound Dalton had made when that thing took his arm. I requested leave on November 18th. Made it permanent on December 3rd. Leonard accepted without comment. Just signed the paperwork and slid it across his desk. Our final conversation happened in his office on a gray afternoon, snow falling silent outside the windows. "It's not your fault," he said. "He lost his arm because of me." Leonard opened a drawer, pulled out a folder. Old, the edges worn soft. He spread 3 incident reports across the desk. Winter 1979, 3 deaths. Summer 1962, 2 deaths. Fall 1947, 4 deaths. Every single incident, he said, was preceded by people talking about it. Rangers, locals, hunters. Someone always broke the silence first, and every incident stopped when we stopped talking. I stared at the reports. The dates, the names, the sanitized language that meant people had died screaming. That doesn't make sense. Some things don't have explanations, Rhett. They just have patterns. The smart thing is to respect the patterns. I moved back to Wisconsin. My parents' house, my childhood bedroom. 24 years old, sleeping in a twin bed under posters I'd hung in high school. I fell apart over the next years. Duluth for a while, then Minneapolis. I couldn't hold jobs. Relationships failed before they started. I drank too much. I was angry all the time, at everything, at nothing. Dalton and I didn't speak from 1988 to 95, 7 years of silence. We managed holiday calls after that, polite and distant. How's the weather? How's work? Generic questions that meant nothing. He got married, had kids, built a life that didn't include me, that didn't need the ghost of who we'd been. I got sober in 1999. It took 3 tries, but it stuck. I reached out to Dalton again. He was gracious about it, accepting. We rebuilt something over the years. Not what we'd had, but something. We never talked about that night, not once. Vernon's obituary appeared in the Duluth paper 5 years ago. 88 years old, died peacefully in his sleep. I wanted to attend the funeral. Couldn't bring myself to do it. It wouldn't have been right. Last month, Dalton's daughter called me. 20 years old, studying environmental science, wants to join the Forest Service. She asked about my time as a ranger. I gave her the same lie. Beautiful country, rewarding work, just wasn't the right fit for me long term. 36 years of lies. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The weight of it pressed down like physical mass. This knowledge, this silence, passed down through generations of rangers who learned the hard way. Vernon had known. Leonard had known. Now I knew. And I realized I needed to tell the truth. Not to Dalton's daughter. She doesn't need this weight, this burden, but to someone. Someone who might listen. Someone who might understand that some warnings aren't superstition. They're survival, not for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. But so someone else might learn what silence costs, and what breaking it costs more. I'm driving to see Dalton next week. 5 hours north, into the same territory we used to patrol together. I haven't been back in 36 years. I've printed this account. All of it. Every word I've written sits in a manila folder on my passenger seat. Dalton will read it first. Before anyone else. Before it goes anywhere. If it goes anywhere at all, I don't know what he'll say. I don't know if he'll approve of what I've done. He might ask me not to share it. If he does, I'll respect that. I'll burn every page and never speak of it again. I owe Dalton that much and more. I owe him 36 years of silence I should have broken differently, sooner, with him instead of strangers. But I hope he understands why I needed to write it. Not for forgiveness, I said that before, and I meant it. What happened to Leonard, what we did by breaking protocol, that's not something you get forgiven for. You carry it. You learn to walk with the weight, or you don't walk at all. I wrote it so someone else might learn what I had to learn the hard way. The old ways exist for good reasons. The protocols, the silence, the refusal to explain. They're not superstition. They're not ignorance. They're shields built from experience, from loss, from the accumulated wisdom of people who paid in blood to understand what works and what doesn't. Don't break silence about things you don't understand. Don't assume you know better than collective knowledge that's survived generations. Don't mistake explanation for understanding. Respect patterns even when you can't see the reasoning. Investigate your own arrogance before you investigate mysteries that have killed better people than you. Some knowledge costs too much. Some questions don't have answers worth the price of asking. Listen to those who came before. Respect their warnings even when they seem arbitrary. The story repeats itself when the pattern gets broken. Someone always thinks they're different, smarter, more rational. Someone always pays. Dalton's daughter will face a similar choice when she joins the service. She'll hear the warnings, she'll be told not to ask certain questions, not to go certain places, not to speak certain names. She'll have to decide whether to listen or whether to prove herself by breaking the rules. The cycle continues. It always does. And now you know. You've read this account. You understand the pattern. The Wendigo is still there in those northern forests, in places where the trees grow too close and the silence runs too deep. The protocol is still the same. Don't speak the name. Don't investigate. Don't break the silence. Respect the boundaries. Some things are better left alone. By reading this, you've engaged with forbidden knowledge. You know what happened when we didn't listen. You know what the warnings mean and why they exist. Now you have to decide what to do with that knowledge. Whether to respect it or dismiss it. Whether to heed the pattern or repeat it. The responsibility passes. That's how it works. Someone has to carry the weight so the next person has a chance to choose differently. I'm writing this on a Tuesday evening. The folder is sealed. My bag is packed. In 6 days, I'll hand these pages to Dalton and wait while he reads. I don't know what he'll say. I don't know if he'll forgive me for breaking our shared silence, or if he'll understand that some silences become their own kind of lie. I don't know if his daughter will listen to the warnings she receives, or if she'll make the same mistakes we did. I don't know if you'll take this seriously, or if you'll